We're taught to believe there are two sides in the drug war: cops and traffickers, agents and cartels, the people who sell poison and the people who stop them. But what happens when the line between them disappears? Tonight isn't about street dealers or cartel bosses, it's about the people with badges: DEA agents, federal task force officers, elite gun squads, the ones trusted with millions in seized drug money, confidential informants, national security level intel, and how some of them stole from evidence, sold secrets to cartels, planted drugs, framed innocent people, ran their own criminal enterprises under color of law. This is Badges for Sale: 5 Dirty DEA Agents and Officers Who Crossed the Line.
On paper, Jose Irizarry was the kind of DEA agent they brag about. Fluent in Spanish, good with money trails, polished, charismatic, impressive in a suit. He was assigned to one of the most sensitive jobs in the agency: tracking cartel cash, running undercover money laundering stings, moving millions through shell accounts to expose higher-ups. To his colleagues, he was the financial wizard, the guy who could follow dirty money across continents. In reality, he was quietly becoming one of the cartel's best assets inside the DEA. Between roughly 2010 and 2017, Irizarry helped set up supposed undercover bank accounts, posed them as DEA-controlled fronts, then quietly rerouted millions of cartel money into accounts he and his partners controlled. It wasn't petty skimming. Over $9 million in laundered funds, funneled through an international network of corrupt bankers, former law enforcement, U.S.-based smugglers, and a Colombian trafficker he'd befriended while posted overseas. And he didn't just stash the money, he lived like a trafficker. Private jets, luxury resorts, bottle service and high-end clubs, custom suits, expensive cars and jewelry. On the outside, he still wore the badge. On the inside, he had become a narco in government clothing. Worse than the money, he compromised operations, tipped off cartel leaders about investigations, exposed confidential informants and targets. Those decisions didn't just cost cases, they could have cost lives. By 2016-2017, things stopped adding up. Suspicious transfers, unexplained gaps in sting operations, money not showing up where it was supposed to. The FBI stepped in. Wiretaps, subpoenas, surveillance, financial forensics. The paper trail led straight back to Irizarry. When confronted, the clean, sharp image collapsed. In 2021, Jose Irizarry pleaded guilty to 19 federal charges, including money laundering, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. He admitted it, said he'd been seduced by the lifestyle. His sentence? 12 years in federal prison, but the prison term is only part of the story. The bigger damage: international partners now less trusting of DEA operations, compromised stings that may never be fully untangled, proof that with enough money, even the watchdogs can be bought.
In Louisiana, DEA agent Chad Scott was a star. Big busts, big headlines, big reputation. He was the agent other agents talked about. Aggressive, effective, gets results. He wore that reputation like armor. And behind it, he built a career on pure corruption. Over almost 2 decades, Chad Scott planted heroin and cocaine in people's cars, wrote false reports to frame suspects, pressured informants to lie under oath, threatened defense attorneys and leaned on prosecutors, stole cash from operations, resold seized drugs back onto the streets. He weaponized the system. If he wanted you guilty, the evidence would magically
appear. If he needed a witness, someone would remember exactly what he told them to say. For years, his conviction rate was high, his stats looked great. Supervisors didn't want to look too closely. Then, in 2016, a routine case cracked open. An internal review spotted missing evidence, testimony that didn't match paperwork, holes in a story that should have been airtight. Internal Affairs started pulling more of his cases. What they found was a web of lies going back years, over 20 federal convictions resting on planted drugs, fake testimony, and falsified reports. Those convictions were tossed out. Men serving 10 to 15 years walked free. Entire families realized loved ones had been in prison for crimes they never committed. And then came the money and drugs. Scott had stolen DEA funds, taken seized narcotics from storage, and resold them through criminal contacts. Even worse, he wasn't working alone. A network of other dirty officers under him were trading cooperation for favors and immunity. In 2019, Chad Scott was arrested and charged with obstruction of justice, perjury, conspiracy, theft of government property, and civil rights violations. He claimed it was all retaliation, that he was being punished for being an aggressive agent. The evidence buried that argument. In 2022, he was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. The fallout? Over 30 cases tied to him were vacated. Prosecutors had to reevaluate years of work. Louisiana paid out settlements to the wrongfully convicted. Chad Scott used his badge like a weapon, not a shield. And for nearly 20 years, one of the most dangerous criminals in Louisiana wasn't on the streets. It was inside the DEA.
Some betrayals are measured in dollars. Keith Graves' betrayal is measured in trauma. He was a DEA task force officer in Reno, Nevada, embedded in narcotics operations, supposed to be taking down traffickers. Instead, he hunted the vulnerable. From 2011 to 2014, Graves targeted sex workers, undocumented immigrants, women struggling with addiction and poverty, people he believed no one would listen to, no one would believe over a federal agent. He used his role like a weapon. Late-night traffic stops, interviews in unmarked cars, isolated locations. The script was always the same. Help me and I'll make your charges go away. You're a prostitute, I'm DEA. Who do you think they'll believe? If you don't do what I say, I'll lock you up or have you deported. Victim after victim later described being forced into sex acts, assaulted while he was armed and on duty, threatened into silence. For years, complaints didn't reach the right ears or weren't taken seriously until one woman refused to stay silent. In 2014, she walked into a police station and filed a formal complaint, named him, described the assault, told them he'd used his badge as leverage. Reno authorities actually listened. They investigated. What they uncovered? At least 11 women, possibly more, with the same story. Same tactics, same threats, same terror. Graves wasn't a one-off predator. He was a serial rapist with federal credentials. Federal prosecutors charged him with sexual assault under color of law, civil rights violations, kidnapping, obstruction of justice. The trial was brutal. Survivors took the stand, described being handcuffed, assaulted behind buildings and in warehouses, told nobody would ever care. Some said he'd kept trophies. He'd bragged in text about breaking in new girls, joked about being untouchable. In 2016, a federal jury found Keith Graves guilty on all counts. His sentence? Life in federal prison. He became one of the only DEA-linked officers in U.S. history to get a life sentence for sex crimes committed on duty. The aftermath? DEA forced to overhaul internal reporting on misconduct. joint reviews across agencies for sexual abuse allegations against federal officers. Because when someone like Graves gets a badge, it's not just a crime against his victims, it's an attack on the entire idea of justice. He didn't steal money, he didn't flip for a cartel, he stole dignity, safety, humanity. And that's why he'll never walk free again.
Most dirty agents are chasing money, status, or power. Matthew Lowry was chasing the high. He joined the DEA young, got assigned to Washington, D.C., landed in the Special Investigations Unit, dealing with major heroin busts, high-level trafficking rings, evidence handling on big federal cases. He had the keys to evidence rooms, pure heroin seizures, the chain of custody. Then came a back injury. Doctors prescribed opioids, Percocet, oxycodone. Like millions of others, he took them, then needed them, then couldn't imagine life without them. When the prescriptions ran out, he didn't go to street dealers. He went to DEA evidence. At first, he stole tiny amounts from bags, shaved off a little, forged weights, fudged logs. Then it escalated. He took whole bricks, even entire kilos, home, injected multiple times a day, returned to work high, armed, and still trusted. To hide it, he backdated evidence logs, faked paperwork, tampered with evidence weights, sometimes returned diluted heroin, sometimes didn't return it at all. For over a year, nobody suspected a thing. Cases continued. Prosecutors billed charges. Judges sentenced people. Defense attorneys assumed the evidence was clean. Until September 29, 2014. Lowry was found unresponsive in his DEA-issued vehicle in a D.C. suburb. Inside the car, dozens of heroin packets, syringes, evidence bags, a loaded gun, and a journal where he documented stealing drugs for himself. The fallout was nuclear. Federal prosecutors had to dismiss 28 major federal drug cases, some with multi-kilo seizures, some involving international rings, cases built over years. People, already convicted, already in prison, started walking free. Judges were furious. The U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. called it one of the most severe law enforcement breakdowns in recent history. The DEA launched internal audits, reviewed over 150 cases, publicly acknowledged that one agent's addiction had poisoned a system. In 2015, Lowry pleaded guilty to 64 counts, including obstruction of justice, theft of government property, falsifying records, and heroin possession. His sentence? Just 3 years in federal prison. For many, that felt like a slap in the face, considering how many cases he destroyed and how much trust he shattered. Lowry said he never sold drugs, only used them for himself, but the consequence was the same. One addict with a badge collapsed an entire federal district's credibility.
Baltimore, Maryland, a city already drowning in drugs, guns, corruption, mistrust between citizens and police. To fix it, they created a special unit, the Gun Trace Task Force, GTTF, an elite squad meant to get illegal guns off the streets, work closely with DEA and federal partners, target the worst of the worst. At the top, Sergeant Wayne Jenkins. On paper, he was a hero. Hundreds of arrests, dozens of guns pulled off the street, awards, promotions, Officer of the Year. In reality, he was leading a criminal crew in uniform. The GTTF under Jenkins was robbing drug dealers of cash, drugs, and weapons during raids, reselling seized narcotics, sometimes through middlemen with cartel connections, planting fake evidence to justify stops and arrests, filing fake overtime claims for work they never did, breaking into homes without warrants,
stealing safes and splitting the money, running tax traffic stops, targeting people who just looked like they had cash. Jenkins taught his squad how to write believable lies, how to justify illegal searches, how to spin stories in court to keep everything looking clean. They were producing guns, drugs, arrests. The system rewarded them. So no one looked too hard at how they got those numbers. While they wore the badge, they stole over $1 million in cash, capped kilos of cocaine and heroin, framed people to cover their thefts. One case, Umar Burley. Jenkins' team planted heroin in his car. A chase followed. An innocent man was killed in a crash. Burley went to prison for 7 years for drugs Jenkins put there. Jenkins also staged a fake car accident, filed a bogus insurance claim, and cashed in, even on the civil side. They even used DEA informants to set up drug deals, rob the dealers, and resell the product using the same informants as middlemen. This wasn't petty corruption. It was organized crime with police powers. In 2016, federal agents wiretapping a suspected dealer started hearing things, references to cops, strange patterns in robberies. They realized some of the traffickers' worst problems weren't rival gangs. They were the gun trace task force. The FBI bugged cars, watched movements, assembled a timeline. In March 2017, Jenkins and 7 other officers were arrested in coordinated raids. The charges read like a mafia case: racketeering, robbery, conspiracy to distribute heroin, possessing firearms in furtherance of drug trafficking. In court, officers and witnesses testified Jenkins wasn't just in on it, he was the kingpin. He pled guilty, admitted to stealing over $1 million, keeping drugs, and falsifying reports. In 2018, Wayne Jenkins was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The aftermath? Over 300 convictions tied to the GTTF were reviewed. Dozens were overturned. Baltimore paid out more than $15 million to victims. The story became an HBO miniseries, We Own This City.
Jose Irizarry, Chad Scott, Keith Graves, Matthew Lowry, Wayne Jenkins. 5 men, different cities, different motives. One wanted the cartel lifestyle. One wanted power and convictions, no matter who he had to frame. One used the badge to hunt the vulnerable. One let addiction wreck an entire federal district. One built a gang inside the police department. They weren't outsiders. They were the inside. They had the passwords, the keys, the evidence rooms, the authority, the people around them. Saw warning signs, heard rumors, noticed inconsistencies. But as long as the stats looked good, the arrests kept coming, the headlines were flattering, too many people looked the other way. That's the real danger. Not just that criminals can wear badges, but that systems will protect them until it's too late. If you're still here, you're not just interested in true crime. You're interested in how power really works and how fragile justice becomes when the enforcers stop playing by the rules. If you want more deep dive breakdowns like this, subscribe to the channel, like this video so more people see it, and tell me in the comments which case shocked you the most, and do you think the system caught them early enough or only after the damage was done? Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, sometimes the scariest criminals are the ones who already have the keys to the evidence locker.